But first, I'm going to get to the fullback rankings, and then we'll examine the trade I heard. But Kalel Mullings, Michigan, is my number one fullback. Eli Wilson, Appalachian State, is my number two fullback. G. Scott Jr., Ohio State, is my number three fullback. Corey Dyches, the California fullback, comes in at 4, and DJ Thomas Jones comes in at number 5. Those are my top 5 fullbacks. We talked about Mullings last year on the podcast. I thought he was going to be in the draft. He ended up going back. He's the number 1 fullback, of course. But outside of Mullings, is there a fullback that impresses you? Because this is going to be a pretty brief live stream before we get to the NHL Pacific Division. But we might go over the Lions Raiders trade rumor I heard, Joey. It is massive trade rumor. Do you just want to get to that? Because I think you have more interest in that than the fullback rankings, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah, because I'm not seeing outside of Mullins, if you make other rotations, I don't see a fullback.
All right, I'll put Mullings in round 6. I had him in round 7, but I'll put him in round 6. I'll bump him up. That's fair. Now, as far as the trade goes, the Lions are trying to make a deal with the Raiders. And the Raiders are going to, apparently Adams and Crosby are going to go to the Lions. That's the trade rumor. But the Raiders would be getting 2 first-round picks, a conditional third-round pick this year, which becomes a second if the Lions make the Super Bowl, and they'd get Hendon Hooker. That's the return the Raiders would be getting. Honestly, that's the rumor we're hearing. I read it this morning on a Facebook group. Like, really? Is this serious? Are the Raiders seriously entertaining this idea? But that's an excellent return. That's the best return you're going to get if you're the Raiders. I mean, yeah, you have to trade your 2 best players away, but you get 2 first-round picks, a third, which becomes a second if the Lions make the Super Bowl. Which, if you put Crosby next to Aiden Hutchinson and you put Devontae Adams next to Amon-Ra St. Brown and you move Jamison Williams to the slot, I don't know if there's a team in the entire NFC that can beat the Lions if you add Crosby and Adams to that roster. It would be easily the Raiders' biggest trade since they moved Khalil Mack to the Bears for 2 first-round picks. And the Jaguars have never been to a Super Bowl either. With the exception of the NFL, minus the expansion teams. Okay. All right. But there were multiple offers for Adams. There have been multiple offers for Adams, though, Joey. The Jets offered a second and Reddick for Adams. The Raiders did not budge on that. The Ravens offered a second, a fifth, and Nelson Aguilar. Raiders didn't budge on that. Steelers offered a second this year and a fourth next year. The Raiders didn't budge on that. So there have been multiple offers for Adams, but the one that stands out is the proposal between the Lions and Raiders because it literally helps both teams. But the Raiders would be going into a full-on rebuild if they made that deal, where your only asset would probably be Colton Miller at left tackle. That would be your only asset. And then the rest of this roster is a complete rebuild, essentially. You don't have a number one receiver. You don't have a quarterback. You don't have an edge rusher. Yeah, you do have, yes, you still technically do have you do have the former Buffalo defensive end. Forget it, Malcolm Kuntz. You have Malcolm Kuntz and Tyree Wilson, the Raiders 2023 first round pick, as your starting edge rushers. But I'm not sure either guy's done enough to warrant an extension past a rookie deal, but they would be your stopgaps if you decide to draft a quarterback and a receiver in the first round this year. They'd be your stopgaps at defensive end. So, and you'd have Hendon Hooker too for insurance if Minshew struggles. You'd have Hendon Hooker waiting in the wings. But that's something that's been talked about. So we'll see if that goes down. I don't think it will, but it was an interesting trade rumor. And I rarely talk trade rumors on the podcast, but that trade rumor was interesting enough to warrant my attention, Joey, for a few minutes. Because if I just talk about the fullback rankings for 5 minutes on the live stream, that's just really short, really cut